Thank you everyone for joining us. This is Erin Castillo, the moderator for tonight's presentation. I am joined by John Shustra, who is the SoCal Hort Society president, and also by our Yvonne Savio, who is going to be leading the webinar tonight. So let me get them all set up. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi, Erin, and hi, everybody.
All right, John.
Started, Erin?
Yes.
All right, terrific. Great to know that all of you are out there. I can't see you, but I do know that there are friends, members who we haven't seen for a long time, and we're anxious to see each other face to face. But I also know that there are over 200 of you who are not members, and I'm really happy to welcome you to our webinar tonight. And I'd like to start off by telling you a little bit about Southern Cal Hort. And you've tuned in for a great night. Not only do we have a great speaker, but an exciting announcement about SoCal Hort to make. So Southern California Horticultural Society, what is that? Sounds kind of pretentious, but it's not. Our motto is really where gardeners and plant people get together to share ideas and knowledge. And people have been members of Southern California Hort, SoCal Hort, we say, for some of them for over 50 years. And they're still celebrating their 59th birthday every year. It's just great to have such a long-term relationship with people who share your passions for plants. And I know some of you are just getting started in horticulture. Really growing your own veggies is the gateway drug to horticulture. And some of you will broaden your interests later on and might want to consider joining SoCal Hort. Who's in here with us? Well, Southern Cal Hort does have the eminent botanists and famous landscape architects and people who work for the Huntington and nursery owners and lots of professionals, but far more of our members are just people who love plants. And they can be postmen, and they can be garbage men, and they can be doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs. Some of us and this is the place where we get together to share that passion. And I'd like to tell you about one of those members who was not a professional. Longtime member Ruth Boren, who's no longer with us, joined and attended meetings religiously for many years. She had a lot of passions, not just horticulture. And whatever she was passionate about, she really dove in deeply. So I do know from the family that she was personal friends with the man who designed and hand-built the furniture in their living room. And for her garden, she traveled all over the world with the landscape designer who helped her work out her garden. And that garden, a non-professional botanic garden, being featured multiple times in Sunset Magazine, the LA Times, and amazingly maybe to some of us, in a really prestigious book written by Christopher Lloyd of Great Dixter in England about gardens of other people. So that's really quite a testament to the way she dove in deep on the passions that she had. Now her husband, Dr. Ray Boren, did not share the same passions as Ruth. His kind of theme song, you would say, came from the Sound of Music, climb every mountain. And he really did. And maybe the refrain for the song would be, climb every mountain, but don't expect me to work in the yard. And at over 100 years old now, he is not climbing a lot of mountains, but Dr. Boren is doing something that he has done in his life. And that is continuing to support the passions of Ruth Boren and the interest, even if they maybe weren't interests that he shared. And that really leads me to tonight's announcement. We have just received a gift from the Boren family to fund the Ruth Boren Southern California Horticultural Society annual speaker series. And we're thrilled to have their confidence and to be able to tell you about that. It's just happened, so many more details coming out. But you might ask, especially if you're a newcomer to horticulture, what kind of speakers, what kind of rock stars do we have in horticulture? And I personally can think of a couple of Indiana Jones types that have risked their lives to scour the world for new plants. I can think of a landscape architect who designed a park to a score by Bach, and who can speak eloquently to us about how a landscape architect can take human needs and science and art and turn it into a place that's not just okay, but it's sublime. I could go on, but it's not my duty. We have a committee for that. And there'll be a lot more to come about the Ruth Boren speaker series in the next few months. For now, let's all just give a great silent thanks to the Boren family and to the confidence they have our ability to honor Ruth, and thank you for maybe having Ruth with us for longer than some of us 59 somethings will be around. It's a terrific gift. Now, of course, I can hear some of you online right now going, oh, I was going to do that. I'd love to sponsor a speaker series, and we can't all do that. But, if you're feeling like supporting a good cause in horticulture, we're still the right place to come to. I can tell you that the speaker series is going to be terrific. We also focus on supporting those in the field of horticulture and who are going into the field of horticulture. A lot of us sort of baby boomers can remember the renaissance of horticulture 30 or 40 years ago, when a whole wave of great people entered horticulture and really changed it. It's amazing to look at gardens before and after that renaissance. But then the next generation didn't really get into horticulture. I don't know if it was the coming of cable TV or Facebook or what, but there isn't that next generation. I can say, however, that the generation now in their early 20s that's coming into horticulture is amazing. I've met many of them, some of the junior colleges and universities, but they have a tough time pursuing their passion in horticulture, and they're going to have a big impact. Most of you probably would expect that you don't get into horticulture to get rich. I can personally say that as a young guy, I worked for as little as 50 cents an hour gardening. And as a father, I worked some years as a nursery owner for $0 a year. So I know you do it for the passion, but I do feel that this generation of horticulture students have it tougher than I did. The cost of housing, the cost of education else is amazing. So we're working on making it a little more clear what kind of internships, scholarships, and so on can be funded through Southern California Horticulture Society. And we hope you'll take a look at that. And you don't have to be a huge benefactor to support Southern Cal Hort. We're into plants. At our meetings, we have raffles. What kind of a group would have a raffle of vintage pruning shears? Dozens of them. Well, you missed it. COVID canceled it. But when we get together again, we're going to have that. Think about that as you're decluttering, or even as you're contemplating. Years ago, the partner of one of our great members Charles Hardman got in touch with us after Charles died sooner than we thought. He had a world-class plant collection, and his partner just had no idea what to do, and he was heartbroken, and these things needed attention. They could really, there were hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in his plant collection, and Southern Cal Hort got some people together, and we kind of parceled it out. Hey, these are really going to the Huntington Library. These belong in the Orchid Society for a raffle. And we had books of his that made it to the Southern Cal Hort raffle table as well. Other times, you know, the loved ones just don't know what to do. And we went to a great member's home after she passed, and the 2 dumpsters that had already been filled had most of the good stuff, but we still managed to find new homes for a lot of her books and a few of her so on. So think about that too. Really, you're here for the speaker, so I should not go on and on. And speaking of speakers, there's Yvonne right in front of me. Now, I know all of you registered for this Zoom webinar and have read her resume, so I'm not going to read it again to you. I can say I can't think of anybody who has spread more of the joy of gardening in Los Angeles County in this century than Yvonne, and I'm anxious to hear what she has to say. So I'll say goodnight and look forward to seeing you again online or hopefully in person someday. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Thanks a lot, John, and hi to all of you. Certainly it has been my joy through Master Gardeners to really spread the good word, so to speak, of gardening. So I would like to thank the SoCal Hort Society. I am on the board, and I've been promoting vegetables for years and years and years. So I would like to give all of you a bit of basic advice on many topics on how to start your own garden, or if you already have, to continue doing the good work of it all, and maybe alert you to a couple of different points that you may not have considered, or that you weren't particularly clear about why the magic was working or not working. So here, I wanted to remind you that on the that announcement page, my outline that I'll be following with my discussion here is available to you on the SoCal Hort website under meetings. There's a link and you can print it out, and that way you won't be so concerned about perhaps scribbling down little notes to yourself, that you have a lot of it right there. So here we go. So vegetables and herbs, an overview of cultural techniques. Now, I do have a website that I was fortunate enough to be able to initiate once I had retired from the Master Gardener program, running it in 2015. And this is it here, www.gardeninginla.net. And if you want to email me, it's gardeninginla@gmail.com. So let's proceed on. So native to the Americas, there are so many of our regular old veggies and fruits that are native to the 2 Americas, North and South. And even though most of them are native to Central and South America, there are some that are very owned by ours here in Northern California. And certainly the cranberries are the things that I have literally found where they grew on the East Coast in Connecticut area. And it was just wonderful going to the bog and seeing how it all worked, especially one of the packing houses that has been there through, I guess, 7 or 8 generations. and they were showing how they used the equipment that they had invented, and now we're still utilizing it. And that reminds me of one resource we have here in the city of Ontario, Graber's Olives. When we can all move about again, I highly recommend going out there for their tour, because it is, they developed a grater, you know, for the sizing of the olives. And also it is marinated in just salt water. So it doesn't have a lot of the chemicals and lyes and all that other stuff. So it's just a fascinating tour. And then of course, what I call a toy store for plants. Everything that you could imagine would be having an olive theme is going to be there as well. So of course you have to bring some of the olives home. They taste very buttery and they're just absolutely wonderful. So these items native to the Americas: beans, blueberries, corn, cucumber, grapes, potatoes, squash, strawberries, sweet potatoes, prickly pear cactus, both the pads, which are called nopales, and the cactus fruit, which is this little guy here, is called a tuna. Now, many times when we lived in Monterey, there was a wonderful, huge plant on the road going out to Salinas that had these prickly pear cactus that were a brilliant purple, and they were so sweet and wonderful. But of course, there's little, what are called glochids. See these little spots on here? Well, that's where these teeny little barbs are that you have to be very careful of not getting in your skin. You know, you handle it with a knife and fork and cut all that off before you eat the flesh inside. So let's move on to actually gardening. Now, we are in the hot time of the year here, and frankly, on my website, I have all the monthly tips that I've garnered over maybe 25 years of living here in Pasadena, and also up in Davis when I was teaching at the university up there. So you can see that on those monthly tips, just all the many kinds of things that you can do in the garden that particular month. And of course, our weather is always different every time, and it's always the same every time. So whatever you need to do, there's always a selection of tasks that you can accomplish at that time. So right now in July and August, I pretty much don't do anything new in the garden, just because as it's going to be this weekend, terribly hot, and it's hard enough for the plants to just get through this super hot time, even if you have watered very deeply and frequently. And by the way, if you haven't yet, do it tomorrow, because those plants are really going to be having a hard time over those Saturday and Sunday. So what I prefer to start with this evening is the fall and winter gardening. These are the cool, what we call cool season plants. And that way you can have an idea of what you can be starting to think about and how you want to proceed when we come more to September and October and November, when it actually starts, well, theoretically, to cool down. So the parts of the plants that we eat is the way I have organized both the fall and winter gardening and the spring and summer warm season gardening. So these are the veggies that we eat the roots of. So of course, many colors of beets. Here, this circle one with targets in it is Chioggia. And then there's the yellows and the whites. And then of course, what I consider to be the only beet that tastes like a beet is Detroit dark red, the long ones, or the red ones. And many times people will throw away the greenery on top. And frankly, that's full of nutrition, and it's wonderful to use in place of spinach or some chard, something similar to that, all the kales, either raw or cooked. Carrots have become multicolored all over again. And if you probably did not know that this dark purple color is the original carrot color. And then it's native to Turkey. And all of these then other colors have been the derivations of that original one. Parsnips, all these different kinds of radishes, and this daikon here, radish, my apologies for not being too much in focus. The stems that we eat of the cool season crops are going to be the asparagus and potatoes. It really was kind of a surprising thing to see which part botanically we eat of the plants, because you'd think a potato would be a root, but in fact it is not. This stringy thing is the root, but these are swollen stems. And then of course, this is the foliage part up here. The leaves, we have cabbages, and there are several kinds. Here's the smooth, but the gray-green. Here's the Savoy type, which has the rippled cabbage leaves. And you do need to recognize that this takes a lot of space to grow, even though the head of it that we end up eating is relatively small. You might need 3 feet square in order to actually grow the cabbage. Here's celery. If you have not grown celery and you are a cook, especially if you do lots of stews and soups and all that good stuff, you really do need to grow celery, because it's right about this height that is just the stalk that you purchase in the market. But it's more than half of the plant is all that wonderful foliage, which of course is wonderful for making soups and stews and all that good stuff. Here we've got lettuce with a nice little ladybug to it. Some more lettuce that is multicolored. Onions, that is truly the leaf that we are eating. Here's where it starts, and as each globe develops, and as you peel your onions, you recognize those layers on layers on layers are in fact leaves. Spinach leaves, and even pea shoot foliage. When I was in Davis and we were first attending the Sacramento farmers markets, this was about the time that a lot of the Southeast Asian people had come and had settled in Sacramento, and they started bringing pea shoots to the farmers markets. And it had never occurred to me to eat the pea shoots. You know, I always just waited for the peas. So here it was wonderful to be shown by another culture that there is more to a particular plant's edibility than just what I had always grown up with. So the immature flowers, you probably have already figured out that that's what broccoli is. That's what Braca flower is, which is a cross between a broccoli and a cauliflower. And the flavor is somewhat less strong than broccoli. So if you have somebody in your family that doesn't like broccoli because they say it's just too broccoli-ish, perhaps this is a Romanesco variety. And isn't that a beautiful formation of it? It's just design-wise, it's just marvel. And of course, artichokes are the immature flower. And if you let those get completely mature, that's where it has that beautiful purple center colors to it. And then, of course, that's what they use a lot in florist arrangements. So the cool season, the big exception to eating the roots, the stems, or the leaves is peas, because we eat the fruit. You know, there's always an exception to every kind of rule. So for the best growing conditions of cool season crops, the air temperature is between 55 and 75. And this is why many seed packets will specify waiting until the air temperature is at least 50 degrees before you start sowing something, because if it's much moister than that and colder than that, the dormancy of the seed is keeping it from sprouting. And you do want a direct sun minimum of 4 to 6 hours per day. This is to develop any of those vegetables that is primarily the foliage part, just the greenery of what you're eating. 4 to 6 hours is what it needs. And peas need more because they're also going ahead with the further development of both the blossoms and the fruit. And we'll see that is more the case with the summer as well, the summer vegetables, just because they're getting beyond just growing the green stuff. They're actually putting out blossoms and developing and then ripening the fruit. So John had mentioned that vegetables were the gateway to gardening, and certainly tomatoes are the main thing. And of course, here's the peppers as well. So the fruit, here is a cantaloupe that is hung inside of a pantyhose. For those of you who remember when we women struggled wearing pantyhose all the time. This is so that the pantyhose is tied at the top of the trellis up here. The melon is put into it and hung so that the brunt of the weight as the melon develops is on the pantyhose, not on the vine itself, which it probably would just literally rip itself off. And so this way you can grow up utilizing the airspace, which provides a lot better air circulation, and consequently there's less problem with the pests and all that nasty stuff down on the ground itself. And then of course, winter squash, those of you who are particularly beginners may have wondered why there's summer squash and why there's winter squash. You do grow both summer squash and winter squash during the summer, the spring and summer. It's just that the winter squash are the ones that you eat the mature vegetable that was on the vine. And one way to tell if it's ripe enough to pick is that you cannot puncture it with your fingernail. Think more like pumpkins. And you can eat it all winter long, which is why it's called a winter squash. The immature fruit that we eat on warm season crops are beans, corn. Now my apologies, because this is really, these are the beautiful corns, which is why I chose them for the photo. However, this is all dried corn and usually field corn, which is more for cattle feed and popcorn, and it is not eaten immaturely. So I'm afraid I'm giving you some incorrect information visually here, but just think in terms of wonderful sweet corn. Cucumbers, both the green ones and the lemon cucumbers, eggplants, peppers, all those different wonderful colors, hot peppers, and squash. So the best conditions for warm season, summer and spring growing are the temperature, air temperature of 65 to 95. Now you remember the air temperature for the cool season was 55 to 75. So you see that this starts 10 degrees hotter and it goes 20 degrees hotter than the other, the cool season crops. And this needs a minimum of 8 hours daily, and more is better, because you will get a better development of the flavor here. Again, because these plants have to not only grow a great plant, but then they have to put out the energy to create the blossoms. They have to get those blossoms pollinated and then develop a fruit and then mature that fruit. Okay, so moving on to a variety selection. Like, why should you choose some varieties over others? Microclimates, those tiny differences that are between perhaps your yard and a friend who is across town, or someone who is at the beach, as opposed to someone who's in a hot area like me in Pasadena. So all of those, there are going to be varieties that will do better in one set of microclimates than another. You know, and it's not just temperature, it's wind, it's chill, it's amount of water, all that stuff that ends up affecting growing. You can choose a particular variety because will stretch the seasons. Like there is Tomato Growers Supply, which is in Florida, organizes its catalog according to early, middle, and late bearing of those particular varieties, as well as all the different colors, so that you can really choose what you would like to have in your garden. Another criteria is the harvest times. How are you going to use it? Do you want all of your fruits available all at once because you're going to preserve them? Like tomatoes, you're going to make one big batch of tomato sauce? Or do you want just 1 or 2 tomatoes each night for, you know, as long as the summer goes? Lastly, there is no such thing as a baby or a gourmet variety. These are marketing terms to make you want to go ahead and buy that particular variety. All you have to do is grow them and pick them when they're less mature or when they're really mature. And all, like these great example of all these carrots, these little tiny stubby things. There is one that's called Romeo, and it's a little round, it's only about 1 inch around. And that's perfect for hard clay soil because the root part, this little stringy thing down here, is usually 5 or 6 inches longer than the carrot part, the part that we eat. And consequently, if it's going to have a struggle time getting down through that hard packed adobe soil, then you're going to want to choose a variety that's pretty much going to develop up on top of it all. Or if you have really sandy soil, like you're at the beach, then you may want the Chantenay type, which are going to go maybe 10, 12 inches deep. So you have all those varieties to be able to choose from so that you have a more successful time in the garden. Now I wanted to show you this photo. This is the original size of the corn, and each of these are about 2 inches long. So this was the corn, not these particular cobs, but these exemplify the batches that were found in caves that were some 10,000 years old and that germinated. So it was marvelous. This is an Armenian cucumber as opposed to those shorter, what were called slicing cucumbers. And of course, having squash blossoms is another way of enjoying your squash. Germination tricks. We talked about air temperature when we were dealing with the ideal conditions for gardening the 2 different kinds of the spring, summer, and the fall, winter. And so now we're talking about the soil temperature. So cool season crops, they really want 50 to 65 degrees. This is when they're going to germinate the most successfully. If it's colder than that, they'll probably just sit there. Like I had mentioned before, that they'll be pretty much dormant. Whereas if it's hotter than 65 degrees, it may go ahead and germinate, but also because the air temperature is much warmer, it may go ahead and bolt on you, which means setting seed rather than, it kind of bypasses the whole time of the edibility that we really are doing it for. And warm season crops, you can start seeds most successfully when the soil temperature is 65 to 80. Now, you can pretty much tell the soil temperature just by putting the palm of your hand on the soil. If it feels comfortable, barely, because it's still so chilly, but it still feels pretty okay, then you're probably okay that you're above the 50 degrees. Now, direct sowing or sowing in trays, you do want to, the big seeds, you do want to seed directly, and also the root crops, the carrots and the all the radishes and all those things, because they have that little tenuous little root that has to go down into the soil. So it's better to direct sow them, because then they're growing in place. And many times you will see, especially at the beginning of the summer or the spring, you'll see cucumbers and corn and those hot weather crops in 6-packs at the nursery. And I recommend not buying those then, but instead planting the seed directly where you are going to be growing them, because then you don't have to worry about any transplant shock. And those seeds were started inside a greenhouse and just fed with nitrogen and watered to an inch of their lives. This way, if you plant them directly into your garden, they grow, they germinate, and they grow up according to your conditions. And they will, after 2-3 weeks, they will be bigger and more satisfactory as plants than any of those that you buy and plant. So it's not like you're going to gain anything by purchasing those seedlings. Now, the Speedling tray is a registered trademark. This is it here. It's a triangular shape, and I'll show you the difference a little later. These are available at Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, which is up in Nevada City. And mail order, my trays I have been now using for 35 years. And I think they were like $5 when I purchased them. I think they're up to $12 or $15 now. And with the shipping, it's quite a hefty purchase. However, as I say, I've been using them for 35 years. So certainly if you are a beginning gardener and you're on the younger age of it all, I heartily recommend purchasing those. And here's the example here. It's a triangular shape, which means the roots are forced to go straight down out the hole at the bottom. And consequently, there's very little transplant shock when you get it into the garden. Whereas plugs that are in this shape, especially if it's grown in a 6-pack, it ends up being just a square that has the roots going around and around and around. And when you transplant them, you really have to spread them out, and there is transplant delay until it gets settled going in the right direction. Whereas these are already in the right direction, so it just continues growing very successfully. Transplanting most vegetables you do at the same depth in the container. Tomatoes, of course, you always do deeper, because it will create a sturdier root system, and potatoes are already under the ground. There is the point, this is called the growing point, which is right at the place where it shifts from being a stem to the root zone. So you always want to plant things at that same depth. Also, you want to handle by the leaves or the roots, but not the stem, because if you crush that stem, it can't do anything. It cannot resprout another one. It can always put out more roots, and it can always put out more leaves. Prepping the soil, isn't this a wonderful compost pile? That's was one of our master gardeners at one of our community gardens took this picture, and I just love it. I've used it as my logo. You do want to feed the soil, not the plants. There are different systems called organic or biodynamic or French intensive. They all are about the same in terms of sustainability of the soil and inputs that are local. Rich, fertile soil or lean soil was a term, as along with the sweet soil and the sour soil, used by farmers in olden days when they literally would taste the soil. The pH, most vegetables do prefer a 6.5 on the scale. And one note about the Master Gardener Handbook, it is available for the public. It's just through UCANR Publications. And it's absolutely, if you're going to have one gardening book, I think that would be it. Raised beds are a wonderful way to extend your gardening. Early season crops and late season crops. You can do much more of it just because the soil is dedicated to what's in that bed. It is good drainage because you have added amendments or created your soil in there. It's easier to work, it's uncompacted because you don't walk in there. You don't stomp on the soil. It's nice and loose, and the roots can easily access all the nutrients that they want in there. And also this particular slide was taken up at the Pasadena Community Garden, where they have the concrete pathways and the walls of the beds so that they are easily accessible by wheelchairs and elders with less, because they can sit on the edge. See, this one here has the cross board sitting space so that then the gardeners can do little hand cultivating in the bed here. Same thing on here. Succession planting is always a good idea just because it keeps having your crops coming all the way through the seasons. For short harvest period or bolt plown plants like cilantro or lettuce in the summer, every 1 or 2 weeks is when you want to sow some more of the seeds. And for a longer harvest period like lettuce in the fall or winter or early spring, you can re-sow things maybe once a month. Here's an example of beets that were from a previous sowing. You know, as I harvested the beets, as they would get the size that I wanted them, there would always be the younger plants that were still waiting to get that size development. So here I ended up sowing another batches. And of course, it's one of those things that as a gardener, you say, well, duh, I had sown the batch of seeds with this label. And then in this batch, I had sown this type. And in this section, I had sown this type. But if you see, I have created the berm around here. So when I watered it, all the seeds mixed in together. Duh. So sometimes you surprise yourself with what you didn't figure out. But of course, the smart thing that actually happened was that I had chosen 3 different varieties that were different colors. So even when they did all germinate and come up and I harvested them, I could tell who was who. So sometimes you aren't so dumb as you think you are. Okay, companion planting and a lot of different kinds of intercropping. These are all things that different people have come up with. This is when I make a presentation to the Master Gardeners, I have to indicate that these are not University of California research, and that they are other people's feelings of what the best way to garden is. So, spacing in the garden is really going to be determined by all these different elements. The germination and maturity rates, for example, sowing radishes and carrots together, because the radishes germinate very quickly and the carrots germinate very slowly. And with the quick germination of the radishes, as they gradually develop larger, they keep the soil nice and loose so that the carrots are able to germinate, because they're really pretty weak in terms of trying to punch through soil. The growing zone, if you picture from the side that you have a batch of things that grow primarily at the root zone, like garlic, the surface of the soil, like bok choy, the mid area, like cabbage, or up on a trellis with peas, you can put all these things very close together because they're not competing for the space that they are growing in. The orientation of the sun, whether something can utilize some shade or not during the summer. The water zone, you need to have plants that need the same kinds of amounts of water. For example, you should not have a herb bed that has cilantro and basil along with your rosemary and lavender. The basil and the cilantro need lots of water. The rosemary and the lavender don't want much of any water. So everybody's going to be unhappy. So you need to develop 2 different places for those growing. So that's your water zone element. There is support of the plants plus the pest deterrents, or what's called a 3 Sisters garden from Indian heritage. The corn grows up. The beans are sown when the corn is about 6 foot or a foot high, because the beans then will crawl up the corn. And then the squash at the base is shading the soil so that the water doesn't evaporate, but also much of its prickliness too is a deterrent to other animals crawling through there. But they all, of course, end up being wonderful companions just in terms of the nutrition that they provide. And the last element to consider when you're spacing is the mature size of the plants. Like I had mentioned, the cabbage getting to be 3 foot by 3 foot, as opposed to like, here's celery in the center, here's broccoli out here, and here's spinach or lettuce at the very front. Here's like, this is a square foot gardening, but here they put 2 cabbages, 1 in each 1 foot. So they're going to run into trouble with those competing with one another later on. Trellising and staking, use the airspace for growing, grow up. The more intensive use of amended soil, because the roots are competing for the nutrition. However, it's more effective because you have so much growing all in one place when you have made such a point to amend the soil. There's better air circulation when things are going up, and consequently fewer pest problems, and certainly nothing hanging on the ground that's going to be attacked by all the creepy crawlies or rotting because of the watering. And the harvest will be clean because it's all up off of the soil. Lengthening the seasons, you can plant despite the weather because you never know what's going to be happening. And on my monthly tips, you'll notice that several things are mentioned to be sowing or transplanting for several months. That's because you can be doing it in that entire range of time. The row cover will help germination and shading. You do want to fertilize, you do want to continue watering and harvesting in order to lengthen your seasons of those crops. Because now I enjoy peppers, these are bell peppers, that once they get red, especially a variety that's called a pimento pepper, I like it really big and thick-walled and sweet. So I will let them get quite far in their development, but I have to harvest them somewhat frequently. Otherwise, the plant thinks it's done its job in terms of continuing its line, putting out its seed, and it will stop putting out flowers. So you really do want to keep things going in terms of harvesting. The irrigation, there are three elements. There's the depth, the frequency, and the methods. So the depth of watering stays the same year-round by virtue of how deep you need it according to the crops. A shallow root system is going to be the celery, lettuce, onion, radish, potato. So you only need to water about 1 foot deep to encompass the entire root system. A moderately deep root system, say 2 feet, is going to be the beans, carrots, cucumber, eggplant, pepper, and squash. And deep watering, which could go as far as 3 feet deep, is asparagus, globe artichoke, melon, pumpkin, and tomato. So that's what determines how deeply you need to water. The frequency is what changes depending on the weather, and you're just sticking your finger below the mulch to see whether the soil down to about that 4-inch level is moist. It doesn't want to be wet. It does want to be still moist. So general concepts are about once every 3 weeks in the spring, once a week, and specifically more if it gets to be over 95, which is what it will do this weekend. Again, in the fall, maybe once every 2 weeks, and in winter, if we get rain, once a month or so. The methods of watering. You can do a handheld hose. You can use this specific for individual plants, and be sure to clean the undersides of the foliage. Overhead sprinklers, mini tubes, soaker hoses, or buried containers. Now this is those 5-gallon containers that you would buy a fruit tree in or so. They have the holes in the bottom, and I bury it almost up to the rim, and then it has these soaker hose all the way along here. And also I use my wand to fill the bucket, and it overflows and moistens all this soil here. But filling the bucket means that it lets the water out into the soil a good foot down, which is where the root system is going to want to be when it is going to be like this tremendous heat. So this is something that you want to incorporate, even if you have your soaker hoses or you have your drip systems, because this enables the water to come out a foot down where the root system should be, and consequently it can thrive during this hot weather instead of dying. Mulch is 5 ways magic. It conserves soil moisture, it moderates the soil temperature, it keeps weeds from germinating, and any that do are easy to pull. It lessens erosion, and it enriches the soil nutrition and texture as it decomposes and feeds beneficial microorganisms. Harvesting, of course, is why we're doing this. Individual taste preferences, you may like a squash when it's a real tiny one or when it's really mature and full of flavor. All the different kinds of uses, from the foliage, the blossoms, the immature fruit, different stages of maturity, the mature fruit, and then seeds. Some plants you can do it at every single level. Some are especially handy just at one. Harvesting the outer leaves is really helpful for lettuce, chard, collards, and kale, because the same plant continues growing until it finally goes to seed or bolts. So you could get 9 months of food harvest off of those same individual plants. And this is especially the case during the cool season crops. I never have any problem getting all these vegetables planted in September, and I'm still eating them in, some of them are lasting all the way to May. So depending on the variety, some of them will be bolting all along that way, but just being able to not worry about having to keep re-sowing the plants or replanting them. So saving seeds, I think it's August 3rd, 2016 is my blog about how to save seeds of the tomato plants. So this is a very short overview version, but the basic distinction is that some seeds that are wet, like tomatoes, they potentially have a virus in the mucous membrane, so it must be fermented off. And that's tomatoes, melons, and squash. Dry seeds, like chili peppers, lettuce, kale, those you just need to let the plant get till it's dry and crispy, like lettuce, peas, and peppers. And that doesn't have that virus potential like that. August 3rd, I think it is, 2016. And that's it. Please eat your yard.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you everyone as well for staying with us and watching our webinar. Before we get into the Q&A, I do want to do our raffle since it's already 8:30, and so if anyone has to leave, I just want to make sure that we get the raffle taken care of. Tonight's winner will be winning 6 seed packets of your choice from Renee's Garden. So I'm going to share my screen right now so you can see our wheel of names. All right, and we are going to tap to spin it. Let's see. Joanna B. Joanna B, if you are present, please raise your hand on the Zoom screen, please. Joanna, are you here? Okay, I don't think Joanna B is here, so let me try one more time. Stephen G, are you here? Can I get a hand raise? Woohoo, Stephen! You win, Steve! All right, fantastic. And also, before we go into the Q&A as well, Steve, I will be reaching out to you. And also, I do want to announce next month's webinar. So next month, we will be having Ernesto Sandoval, the director of the UC Davis Botanical Conservatory. He will be giving a presentation on plant hormones. So if you've ever been curious about why plants grow the way they do, you do not want to miss this presentation. So keep your eye out for the Zoom webinar link and stay connected to all of our social media and our website, www.socalhort.org, for all the updated information. Okay, so let's get started. And we're going to start with the Q&As, okay, Yvonne?
Sure.
All right, so our first question comes from Mary W. Well, actually, it's a comment. Thank you for schooling the masses on best practices of home/master gardening. I know Mary does have another question in here, so we will, here we go. I'm having steady progress with the warm season vegetables planted in my 2 amended raised beds. However, as the summer season goes on, how often and what kind of amendment fertilizer should I be applying to continue gaining vegetables?
Okay, remember when I had talked about the amount of sun that you need, like 8 hours, in order for those plants that go beyond just growing greenery. And when your plants start putting out blossoms, that's a good time to give it some additional fertilizer and just cultivate it into the soil and then water it in very well, because that all the amendments that you utilized when you established the beds, that takes those plants up through their greenery and starting to blossom. But now you want to be able to give them more food to be able to carry through with the blossoming and the setting of the fruit and the maturing of the fruit.
All right, thank you, Yvonne. The next one is from Emily V. Novice gardener here. What is a microclimate?
It just means the difference between my backyard and my front yard, my friend down the other end of the block, or over the hill. Like we are on the north side of a hill, and my garden, the sun goes over the hill about 4 o'clock, but the people on the other side of the hill, that's when they get the brunt of the sun. So we each have to water a bit differently and perhaps choose different varieties by virtue of what's going to do better in our particular conditions. It's micro because it's tiny. It's just our tiny little climate.
Thank you, Yvonne. The next one is from Audrey A. My first attempt to grow zucchinis has resulted in a lot of flowers, but no zucchinis. What should I do?
Not worry about it. Most plants, and squash is notorious for this, they put out the male blossoms first. It's kind of like they're checking it out to see if they'll be successful or not. And then after a week or 2 or sometimes 3, the female blossoms come out and the male blossoms, and that's when they get, the female blossoms get pollinated and they actually set the fruit. So by the same token, if you see at the base of the blossom this little teeny tiny either globe or little squash, and it grows a little bit and then it kind of shrivels up, it means that they were not pollinated. So it's always a good thing to grow several more plants than you think you may need, just because that way you'll have all those many more chances of the blossoms coming out and getting them pollinated between all of them and actually ending up with sufficient squash to be able to enjoy. Now, I prefer the crookneck squash, which isn't quite as productive as the zucchini, but it is a matter of timing of the plant just getting to be a little older and a little more developed, and allowing it to come up with both of those different blossoms that it does need to be able to actually have the squash develop on the female blossoms.
All right, thank you, Yvonne. The next one is from Sandy K. Does shade cloth over tomato plants inhibit pollinations and fruiting?
Tomatoes are, if you just shake the plant, it will kind of pollinate between all the blossoms. It's not like it needs a particular insect coming in or not. So it really doesn't matter, even if you've got them completely enveloped, just shake the plant. Like what I do is I kind of take a handle on my cage and I just kind of shake it back and forth. And also as you're tucking the branches into your cages, you're kind of doing all that as well. So, so the short answer is no, it does not impede it at all.
All right, the next one comes from Cheryl S. How often and what part of the day should watermelons be watered? There are a lot of flowers and some of the leaves are turning yellow.
Okay, at the end of the day, you will, especially like today, I noticed, once it gets above 90 or so, there will be some drooping of the foliage just because it's had a hard day of direct sun. If it is still droopy tomorrow morning, then it really needs water, okay? However, and the watering really needs to be done at the time of day so that the leaves remain dry or have dried out by the time that the sun goes down. So early morning would be the best, but what I have found for plants that I can avoid getting the foliage wet is that I will do it at night, like after dinner or so, or once the sun has gone down, because then the roots will have the entire evening and nighttime to be able to recuperate in order to deal with the sun the next day. But a moisture meter, you know, that thing with the prong on it, and it just has an indicator on top that shows dry or moist or wet. Those I take the guesswork out of it. The prong is about 9 inches long, so that way you can really just stick it in and you'll know exactly then that whether or not you need to water it.
Thank you. This one is from Christina C. I am a single senior who has a very large yard. Although I have a lot of drought, low maintenance plants, it still takes up a lot of my time. Also, I have a bit of a yard that is just dirt. Do you have any ideas for planting this area with a veggie garden that doesn't require a lot of work? For example, veggies in planter, an herb garden using plastic storage bins?
Best thing whenever you're starting a garden is to consider those things that you like to eat, and also whether or not they produce a lot of food for the amount of effort that you're going to be putting into it. For example, the tomatoes are absolutely great just because they give you a lot of food for the amount of effort that you're going to be putting in, prepping the soil, planting it, and then watering it. So it really is going to depend on what you want to be able to eat. However, I would wait and plan what of the fall and winter kinds of items you're going to be wanting to grow. Because it's just so hot right now that, you know, I used to put in a second crop of tomatoes in June. This was prior to like 6-7 years ago when we really started to have this drought thing. Up until then, I put another batch in June, and then those would be bearing for me August through November. I don't bother with that anymore because the amount of water it would take for me to keep those things barely alive, much less thriving, it's just too expensive anymore, so I just don't. So consequently, that's why I'm recommending that you do your preparation and amendments and all that good stuff, planning on planting in the fall, which is going to be more like end of September or October or even November. By the time of Thanksgiving, plan on having your garden in. And just grow a few things, you know, the things that are really going to be things that you want to eat. And I really prefer gardening over the winter just because the mildness of the temperature and being able to grow so much of this stuff like the greeneries, it just makes it a lot less effort for the amount of food that you're going to get out of it.
All right, thank you. This one is from Masami H. What do you recommend when leaves of the peas start to dry up from the bottom? I'm growing sugar snaps. My edamame plant completely went brown and dried up after producing a few pods.
Yeah, I haven't had much luck with the edamame. Like with tomato plants that start browning up at the very bottom, it's just that they're very old leaves and it's got the new growth up top. So it's not a disease issue or anything like that. Part of it is just that it's getting hotter and the plant is a little stressed, just making that transition to the warmer weather. And that's why it's so important when you first put things in to really make a point to get that deep watering going on, so that the roots will grow deeply, so that by the time we get to this kind of hot weather, those roots are really deep, and consequently, they're not going to be stressed because you haven't been watering deeply and they're only maybe in the top 4 inches, which is going to get baked every time we have these temperatures over 95 or so.
All right, the next one is from Chuito S. Where do you recommend we buy non-GMO seeds?
This is why I recommended Renee's. Also, there are several nurseries, on Figueroa here in Highland Park, but mail order is Renee's, and there, I think Johnny's, which is back east, but it has a wonderful information in their catalogs. On my website, if you go to web links, and in the extreme right-hand column toward the bottom is my list of my favorite catalogs, seed catalogs. So most of those, like Baker Seeds, there's quite a few of them. Kitazawa specializes in what were called Oriental greens. But that whole list is going to be wonderful resources for you to check with. And of course, it's fascinating going on to the websites and just seeing all the wonderful stuff.
All right, thank you. The next one is from Wendy L. Why do you have various depths of raised beds? Are taller beds better for certain plants?
Well, it depends on what the depth of those root systems is going to be. In the same way that I talked about the depth of watering was based on the root systems. My beds here at home are all about 3 feet deep. And consequently, you know, I will shift from bed to bed with the different tomatoes just because of the potential for disease and all that stuff that I want to be planting them in different beds each year around. But certainly deeper is better because you are keeping that exactly with the kind of mix that you want, and you're you know, adding the compost and the manure every year so that it is the base, best kind of base for your plants. But deeper is better. If you only start with, you know, a 1 foot high bed, that's fine too, as long as you have dug the amendments into the soil underneath that. But especially if you need to work on top of, like on top of asphalt or a driveway or something like that, then certainly 3 feet is what you're going to want to have available.
All right, the next one is from Julie D. Can you start beet seeds in the exact same spot that you have harvested the beets out of, or is it better to wait? If so, how long if I want to continue to have beets for this season?
Yes, you can. However, rotating crops is a good idea for two reasons. Not just the disease potential, like with tomatoes, so many of them, but you, by planting the same family of plants, like beets, chard are the same family, you're doing two things. You are pulling the same nutrients out of the soil, and number two, you are potentially having the availability of any diseases or problems that might be attacking that particular family of plants. This is why you don't want to put, you know, tomatoes and eggplants, peppers, those are all in the same family, so you want to have those rotating from year to year. So yes, you can plant your beets in the same place, but it's better if you choose another place for 1 year or 2 years, or certainly 3 years. The fourth year, you can come back to the same place again.
All right, thanks, Yvonne. And just as a note as well, we have quite a few more questions that we need to answer, but we'll only answer a few more so that we respect everyone's time. Any questions that go unanswered, we will post on our website and we'll have the answers to those later on, okay? So make sure to check our website as well weekly so that you can see all the new updates, okay? So Yvonne, here are a few more questions and then we'll call it a night, okay? This one is from Patricia B. Do broccoli plants regrow year after year, or do you need to replant each year?
It depends on the plant, the variety, and what's happening in the garden. You know, sometimes it'll just die. Sometimes it will continue. There was 1 year when I had grown 7 different kinds of kales just to see which one I particularly liked to eat. And I did find that the Tuscan kale, the dinosaur kale, was the only one that lasted from year to year. After that first year, all the other ones died just of their own accord. But that dinosaur kale kept going year after year after year. And I found that peppers are the same way. Even after a couple years, they will get less productive. But for those first couple years, it was worth not having to put in new plants.
All right, thank you, Yvonne. The next one is from Juanita D. What do I do about pests? Rats, squirrels, possums?
Move. There is, on the University of California website for integrated pest management, there is a pest notes section that you can go to, and you either put in the name of the plant if you don't know what it is, or the pest if you know what it is, like the squirrels or possums or whatever it is. And it gives you a tremendous amount of information about what are particularly susceptible plants or situations that will encourage those pests to be a problem for you. And then the different levels of how you can go about doing it. If it might be solved by a cultural problem, cultural solution, or something more drastic. Many times just putting some row covers over plants will work. There's a whole slew of different kinds of either cultural or biological or mechanical approaches that you can make, and that's what the UCIPM website will have available.
Thank you. This one is from Stephanie S. I don't have much mulch in my yard. Is it bad to collect dead fallen leaves from walks to use as mulch, or should I not trust it because I don't know where they treated it, what they treated it with?
The answer to both questions is yes. It's a good idea to collect them, but it's also be aware of what might have been sprayed onto the trees, or you know, where it came from. If you have a source that you really trust in terms of just being leaves that fell down on somebody's lawn and they've raked them up, then that's probably going to be a good source. But if you can't tell and you just drive down the street and you see leaves, that may not be, you know, unless you check in with the person, it may or may not be a good source.
All right, this will be our second to last question. This one is from Charmaine. Can the 5-gallon watering methods be used in an orchard setting?
I don't think so. Only because you'd have to put a string of them around. And I think a better approach is to have more of a berm situation where, you know, out beyond the canopy of the tree, you'll kind of build up a bit of a berm so that the interior of the section, starting from about a foot away from the trunk, going out to the canopy line, the drip line there, that you would be able to flood that area so that the entire root zone will be able to be thoroughly moistened. And then, you know, during the winter, if we end up getting too much rain, then knock those berm edges down. So that, but the entire, it's better to have the water be the entire area rather than, and that's the case with the individual plants as well. Like with tomatoes, my tomatoes, I will water in the, I plant them deeply so that I will have a batch of, I'm sorry, I'm struggling on this, you know, a section where the plant is in the center, but this whole area is going to be filled with water. And then right next to that on each side is one of those 5-gallon containers, so that the entire bed is ending up being moist soil by virtue of those couple of different kinds of watering. And for trees, it's much more important to have an equal amount of water in the entire soil area rather than just these couple of bins.
All right, and the last question is actually going to be a combination of two questions, one from Carrie W and another one from Ellen D, but they're both about raised beds. What do you think of raised bed planter bed troughs, galvanized steel ones? And then the second question will be, can you advise how to replenish soil in raised beds? I'm planning a big rehaul after too many years of not enough amendments.
I don't know about the nature of the galvanized metal and the advisability. That would be something for a soil test company to be able to analyze. I don't know what the effect might be. Replenishing a raised bed, you can always purchase soil along with amendments. Certainly Whittier Supply is a reputable source, but you never quite know where, especially that topsoil, comes from. Many times, you know, with new housing developments, they scrape off that topsoil to sell, and but you just don't know where it's come from and what the nature of it has been. So certainly amending it is, and compost and manure and I found coffee grounds really to be a wonderful across the board kind of fertilizer at a very minimal amounts, but to be really, really good in terms of the richness of the soil.
All right, thank you, Yvonne. Thank you for your time. Everyone, thank you so much for staying connected with us all the way through the end. Again, we'll have the remaining questions answered and posted later on our blog, or excuse me, on our website. So be sure to check it to see any of the updates. Thank you, everyone. And don't forget to join us next month, August 13th, for our webinar with Ernesto Sandoval. All right, have a good night. Yvonne, thank you again. There's a lot I want to do in my yard. Have a good night, everyone.